Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today, we're building something incredibly practical and honestly a lot of fun. A complete, full-stack AI wholesaling assistant. Imagine having a We Buy Houses website, and instead of just a boring Contact Us form, your visitors can click a button and immediately start a real-time, face-to-face video call with an AI assistant. This assistant will be able to ask all the important qualifying questions for you, such as what's the property's condition, what's your reason for selling, and what's your estimated timeline and price. And after qualifying them, it'll try to book a follow-up call with you, the human specialist. And of course, to make this a truly next-level experience, we're connecting our agent's voice to an AI avatar for that real-time video communication. And lastly, when the call is over, our voice agent will instantly use another AI call to summarize the entire conversation and automatically email us a complete lead report to our inbox. By the end, you'll have a complete professional-grade AI agent that should look and work a little something like this. So here I'm in our front end, which is this landing page that says get your cash offer. We also say click the button below to speak with your home specialist and see if you can get a cash offer consultation. When I click talk to specialist now, what that did is it contacted our server, created a room for our video call with our AI voice agent, and it created two tokens, one for the agent, which is going to join the room right now, and one for myself, which our client now has to be able to join this room. So now when I click on join call now, I'm gonna turn off the camera and mute myself, and I'm gonna click join and we'll be able to talk to our agent.
Oh, I'm Alex. Thanks for calling. Are you looking to sell a property today?
Yes, I am.
Great. Can I get your name, please? And what's the address of the property you're looking to sell?
Yeah, my name is Jim, and the address of my property is 112 Flower Lane.
Thanks, Jim. Now, could you tell me about the property's condition? Does it need any repairs?
Yeah, it needs some window repairs upstairs and some of the floors need to be fixed.
Got it. Thanks for sharing that. What's prompting you to sell your property?
I'm just trying to get out of the area and move somewhere east.
That makes sense. How quickly are you looking to sell?
I want to get rid of it within the next 3 weeks.
Sounds good. Do you have a price in mind for the property?
Yeah, I don't want to go anywhere lower than around 200,000.
Great, thanks for that information, Jim. This sounds like a property we can help with. The next step is a 10-minute call with our specialist, Jimmy. Are you free tomorrow morning or afternoon?
We could do tomorrow morning around 10 a.m.
Perfect. I'll schedule your call with Jimmy for tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. You're all set, Jim. If you have any questions before then, feel free to reach out. Have a great day.
All right, so let's leave this call. And so this is the email I just received. It says new lead, We Buy Houses. So looking at it from the perspective of I'm a manager and I just got this lead from my AI assistant. It says, hi, Jimmy. I wanted to update you on a new lead I gathered from the phone conversation. And then it gave me the details like the name, the property, the condition. Like it says it needs some more window repairs upstairs and some floor fixes, different relevant things like the timeline and asking price, as well as the meeting time. It said I scheduled a call for him with you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. And we keep it brief and short. Now, this is the email from our AI assistant, and it sends us this email after every successful call it has with the user. So that's just a quick example of a way we can capture data from this call and actually be alerted when our assistant finds a new lead. Now that you've seen our AI wholesaling assistant in action, I want to explain how all the pieces fit together. You might think this is super complex, but it's really just 3 files and 1 user, all following a very logical path. This diagram shows the entire bot runner pattern from start to finish, so let's go through it. It all begins with the user, which is our potential house seller, and the website, which is going to be our index.html file. The user visits our landing page and clicks the Talk to the Specialist Now button. So the code in our index.html doesn't try to start the AI agent itself. Instead, it sends an API request to our boss server. Now this boss server is really just one file, which is going to be bot.runner.py, and this is our orchestrator or the brains of this operation. When it gets that please start a session request from our website, it wakes up and does 3 critical jobs very quickly. First, it creates the actual room. So we're going to be using Daily, and our code is going to make an API request to their servers, and it's going to ask, please create a brand new temporary private room for our video call. So then Daily is going to create that room and send back the URL of the room in the response for the API request. After that, we're going to ask Daily for 2 temporary passwords or tokens. We're going to get one for our bot or our voice agent that's going to join the room, and then one for the user, which is going to be us joining from the front end. Now, this is step 3 in the diagram. The boss server executes a new command to open up a sub process. This is like basically opening up a new terminal window and running our Python bot in the command line. And if you've used Pipecat before, you know the command is something like python bot.py. But anyways, this sub-process is what's going to launch our AI agent or our worker in this bot.py file. And in the previous step, if you can remember, we actually made the room and now we have a URL to join that room. So we're going to be feeding this URL and the token directly to the bot so it knows which room to join and it has access to join that room. So now that the server has made our room, made our tokens for our user and our bot, and employed the bot to join our room, now we get into step 4, or the handoff. At the same time as it's starting the bot, the server sends its response back to the website. This response is a little piece of JSON that says, here's the room info for you. This JSON contains the room URL and the user's participant token. Now that our front end, which is us, has the room to join and access to join that room, the JavaScript on our page is not going to say start call anymore, and it's going to say join call, which now has the unique room URL as its link. From there, we get into the actual conversation. This is the final step where everyone meets. So we, as the user, click the join call button, which opens the daily room in our browser. And at the exact same time, our worker bot, which is just spawned, is joining the exact same room. And that's it. The server's job is done. The user and the worker bot are now face-to-face having a conversation in a private daily call, and the Pipecat pipeline takes over. So this architecture is pretty robust. Like I said, it's only 3 files. The server really just manages the meetings, and we get a fresh new agent for every person who wants to start the call. All right, so now that we saw our wholesale assistant in action and we understand a little bit about how everything works, let's jump into the code. All right, so the first step, as always, is to set up our working Python Pipecat voice agent. So you're going to search up Pipecat Quick Start and then click on this first link. Now, these are Pipecat's official docs that walk us through setting up this voice agent. Now down here in setup, we can see that the first step is cloning the repository. So you can just copy this command and then head over to any code editor of your choice. For this tutorial, I'm going to be using Cursor. Over here in Cursor, I'm going to click Open Project, and I'm going to open this Pipecat bot folder that I just created. Now I'm going to open the terminal. On Mac, you can do that by pressing Control/, and we can just paste in that command that we copied from the Pipecat docs. So what this is going to do is it's going to clone Pipecat's GitHub repository. So we're going to have a local copy on our computer, and then we're going to change into that new directory from the command line. And as you can see, we have some necessary files for setting up our voice agent, most importantly, this bot.py one, which sets up most of the agent's functionality. We also have this env.example, which is an example of how we should format our environment file. So let's go ahead and make that right now. So back in the terminal, we can clear this out. And a simple command we can run to actually copy this env.example into a new .env file is copy env.example into a new file, and we're going to call it .env. So as you can see now, we just created this new .env file, and it's in the same exact format as that example file. And we need to retrieve these 3 API keys right here. So let's head back to the docs. And over at the top here, they include links to retrieve these 3 API keys. So what you want to do right now is go to each of these 3 links, create your API key, and then copy them back into your env file. Once you're done with that step, your env file should look a little something like this. All right, the next step is we have to install our dependencies and necessary packages. So in this pyproject.toml, this file actually tells us all those packages and dependencies that we need to download. And we can do that by running a simple command, which is uv-sync, like so. And what that did is it created a virtual environment at .venv, and it says here installed 126 packages. So a lot of these are plugins that we're going to be using. So we can scroll down, we see Cartesia, we can keep going, Deepgram, and different things we need, Fast API, and a lot more useful packages. Now we're ready to run our bot, and we'll be able to speak with it in the browser. So the command to run our bot is uv run bot.py. Now it's going to take a little bit longer for the first time running this. As you can see here, it takes about 20 seconds for the first run, but right now it's loading our imports. And now it looks like it says our bot is ready, and we can open it at this link in our browser. So let's head over to localhost. You can do that by holding down the command button and then clicking this link. Cool, now we have this Pipecat playground interface. We'll be able to see our bot's audio and see the chat transcription in the middle here. So let's click connect and test speaking with our agent.
Hello, I'm your friendly AI assistant, here to help answer your questions, offer advice, and chat about just about anything. How can I help you today?
Hey, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well, thanks for asking. How about you? What's on your mind today?
Nothing much.
That's totally fine. Sometimes it's nice to just have a quiet moment. If you want to chat, ask a question, or need help with anything, I'm here.
See, our voice agent is working. We can see its audio being transcribed in the middle here. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect from this call. Now I'm going to go ahead and quit the server. You can do that by hitting Control-C. All right, so now that we saw that our voice agent is working, before we move on to the next step, I want to explain this bot.py file really quickly. This is just a Python script that sets up a complete voice AI agent. It works by setting up a pipeline, which is like an assembly line for our conversation. So as you can see here, we speak to our agent and it takes our input. It translates those raw speech frames to text and adds what we say to the agent's context. Then it asks our LLM for an answer, and in this case, we're using OpenAI. Then once OpenAI has given our answer, we take that and convert that to speech frames, which will be outputted to our actual computer so we can hear the agent speak. And once that's done, the agent's response will get added to the context, so the conversation is stored up to date. All right, so this is great, but it's an all-in-one demo. We need to separate the bot from the server. So to do that, we need to modify this file so that it can't start itself. It needs to be spawned by our boss. So first we need to add a few imports to the top. We can go right below where we finished importing the Pipecat transport components and import these 5 right here, as well as daily transport up here like so. Okay, and we can also remove these 3 transports we're not using anymore just to keep it concise. All right, so let's scroll down a little bit, and we're going to change this logger.info line at the top of our file because now this bot is going to be spawned in the background, so we're not going to be seeing anything in the terminal anymore. But these lines will actually show us some debug logs so we can see what's going on with our agent. And then if you look at our actual code, we have this run bot function and then the bot function, which creates the transport. Let's go ahead and just delete this whole bot function as it is, and then let's start editing this run bot function. So instead of run bot, we're just going to have one function and call it main. And instead of the base, transport, and runner arguments, we're going to have room underscore URL, which is going to be a string, and then token, which is going to be a string. And once again, we are doing this because the old run bot and bot functions were the all-in-one server logic, and we are replacing them with a single main function that is triggered only when the boss runs the script. But anyways, these parameters, room URL and token, promises that this function must be given a URL and a token to be able to do its job. Now we actually need to move our logic inside the new main function. So just select everything that is inside of this main function as we have it and press tab to shift it over one indent. And we're going to wrap this in an asynchronous input-output client session object. This will allow us to make HTTP requests to our AI services asynchronously. And the next step is we have to set up our transport. So we can do that like so. We're going to be creating a daily transport object, and we can open up the parentheses. The first things we need to pass in are the room URL as well as the token. And then the third parameter in our daily transport object is going to be the name of our chatbot. So I'm just going to use a random name, let's say Alex for this tutorial. And then for our fourth parameter, we need to use one more daily object, which is our daily parameters. So inside of these parentheses, our API URL and our API key. Now we can grab those from daily.co and I'll show you exactly how to do that. All right, so we're going to switch up daily.co and really quickly just create an account. And then once you do, head over to daily video. And to grab your API key, click on developers on the left-hand side. And right here, you can click on create API key, click on the 3 dots, copy it, and then head back to your code. Back in the code, let's add these to our .env file really quickly. So we're going to take what we just copied and paste that in. And then we're also going to add daily underscore API underscore URL, and you can copy and paste that in like so. All right, so now that we have that, let's continue initializing our transport. So for the API URL, we're going to do os.get and daily API URL, and we're going to do the same for the API key. Now we need to add a few more things such as audio in enabled is equal to true, audio out enabled is equal to true, and these two, which just helps with voice detection for turn taking, and then giving us the option to enable transcription. And this transcription enable parameter is actually going to take care of the speech to text for us. So we're not going to be needing to use deepgram anymore. So we can just delete this line like so. And then don't forget to remove it from the pipeline, but we can also remove RTVI. So I'm going to delete both of those. We also want to add video out underscore enabled is equal to false. Let's also delete this RTVI line so we don't throw an error in our code. Continuing on, we can just delete this line right here. And we also have to pass in the client session into our text-to-speech component. So you can do that like so, AIO HTTP underscore session is equal to session. All right, now our pipeline is pretty much set. We do need to edit the task though. We actually don't need to enable the metrics because we're not going to be looking at them in the UI, but we do need to add one thing, which is allow interruptions and set that equal to true. And then let's just get rid of the observers. All right, next we need to edit our event handlers. So we're going to be replacing on client connected to on first participant joined like so. And then we also need to change that in the name. So on first participant joined. And instead of client, we can just change this to participant like so. And then we can actually delete all this right here. And then what we need inside of this function now is await transport dot capture underscore participant underscore transcription, passing in the participant and getting their ID. And then we can nudge the agent to start by running await task.queue frames and passing in that LLM run frame that we just imported. We also need another event handler, which is instead of on client disconnected, we can just do on participant underscore left. We can edit that in this title as well, on participant left, and then change this. And then we can delete this. And then we're actually going to do something quite opposite as what we did here. So instead of await tasks queue frames with the LLM run frame, we're just going to pass in the end frame like so. And then we need one more event handler. I'm just going to paste it in. This is just another way to check that if a participant leaves, we can just end the call immediately. And we don't need signal interruptions anymore inside of the pipeline runner. So just go ahead and delete it. And keep await runner.run task. Now we're going to edit this Python boilerplate down here. Now we're going to make arguably the most important change in the code. So this right here is what originally started our local server and brought up our Pipecat playground UI. But now we're going to replace it with code that listens for arguments. So if you can remember, we're going to be running this code as a background process when our server tells it to start. So you can think of it like this. Our server is going to run the command python3 bot.py, but it also needs to pass it the room URL and token URLs. So we need to figure out a way to extract those or parse them from the command. So our main function can actually run and take in these parameters and have our agent successfully connect to our online daily room. And we can do that like so. So line by line, what this does is first we create the parser. If you can remember, we imported argparse and then we're using the argument parser method to actually define it. And then we add an argument U for the room URL and T for the token. They're both going to be strings. And to know which is which, we're going to put a U before one and a T before another one. And then this parse arguments method is actually what stores the arguments in these variables. And then as you can see right here, we just run this main file, passing in the room URL and the room token. This is what officially turns the file from an all-in-one demo to a headless worker, ready to be started by our bot runner file that we'll make soon. And we can actually make these required by writing required is equal to true. Okay, so we've just finished our first major refactor. We took the original Pipecat quick start file, which was an all-in-one demo, and we've officially turned it into our worker. So to recap, we took out all the create transport code that was in our bot and run bot functions, and we added a new main function that must be given a URL and a token as arguments. And most importantly, we added this argument parsing step at the bottom. You could think of this as the new front door to our script. And we've told it that the -u for URL and the -t for token arguments are required. So what happens if we try to run this file directly like we did with the quick start? I'm going to try that right now. So bringing up the terminal, we can run the same command that we've been running, uv run bot.py, and let's watch what happens. So it's loading the imports and everything looks fine so far. We get this error, but this is exactly what we want. This is not a bug. This is our new code working perfectly. It's argparse telling us, hey, error, the following are required, -u and -t. Our bot.py script is no longer a standalone server. It's now a worker and is telling us, hey, I can't start, I need instructions from the boss, which I'm waiting for. So now we're going to build that boss or the server. And this is going to be our bot runner.py file. This will be the fast API server that acts as our main orchestrator. It will listen for our website, talk to the daily API, and create the room and tokens, and then it will spawn this bot.py worker, finally giving it the URL and token it's been asking for. So let's jump right in. Let's clear this out. So to create this file, make sure you're in the root directory in your terminal, and you can just run touch bot_runner.py. And it popped up right above our bot.py file on the left-hand side. So let's click it and let's begin building this out. And we need to install some more dependencies, which are Fast API and Unicorn for our server. So you can just run this in the command line. And then you'll see we have it added to our pyproject.toml file with the Fast API and Unicorn in our list of dependencies. Okay, so let's head over to that bot runner file. And the first thing we need to do is include all our imports. So you can include them like so. Once again, you can get all this code from my GitHub repository, which I linked in the description. And we also should add HTTP to our list of dependencies. You can do that just like so. So once again, this file is going to be the brains of our operation. We're going to start simple. Let's just create a basic web server that says hello world. So we're going to be using a modern Python framework called Fast API to build our server and then use Unicorn to run it. Let's create an instance of the Fast API application. We can do that by running app is equal to Fast API with nothing in the parentheses, just like so. Now we need to give our server an endpoint or a route to listen to. We'll tell it to respond when someone visits the homepage, which is just the root URL. So we're going to do that with a decorator called app.get. This tells Fast API when anyone makes a get request to the homepage, run the function right below this line, which is just the root function we've initialized right here. So root is going to handle this request, and we are simply returning a Python dictionary with the key message and the value as hello, I am the boss server. Finally, we need a way to actually run this server. So let's add this block to the bottom of the page like so. So if name is equal to main is just standard Python boilerplate. That means only run this code if we're executing this file directly. And then what we call the .run method for Unicorn, this tells our Unicorn server to start. Look for the file named bot runner, which is the one we're in. And inside that file, find and run the app object, which is what we just declared up here. And that's it. So let's test that our server is up and running. And we can do that in the terminal. So I'm going to make sure I'm in the right directory, and I'm just going to run this bot runner file. What this will do, it'll start our server, and then it'll give us a link in our browser to go to, and we should see this message, hello, I am the boss server there. Let's run the file by running uv run bot_runner.py. And it looks like our application startup is complete and our Unicorn server is running on this link in our browser. So let's head over to our browser. You can just do that by holding down the command key and clicking the link. And great, so in our browser, we see the exact Python dictionary that we returned in our code saying, hello, I'm the boss server. So back in the code, we can quit the server. Now we need to create the special endpoint that our website will call, which is /startBot. And just as we have this get method up here, we're going to add a post decorator because we're going to be sending a post request to Daily's API servers to start this meeting. And you can paste it in just like this. So for those of you that haven't worked with post requests before, post requests are a type of API call where you're going to be primarily sending data or triggering some action. In a get request, you're going to be receiving information. But in a post request, like what we were doing right now, we're going to be sending information to the Daily server saying, here are my API keys. Please create a room and give me a token for myself and the agent to join. And so that's what's going to be going on in this start bot function. For right now, we just had this placeholder message saying received request to start the bot. So back in the terminal, we can test that our bot endpoint is listening by running a simple curl command. So I'm going to go ahead and execute this bot runner file by running uv run bot_runner.py. It looks like the Unicorn server is running. So if we create a new terminal, making sure you're in the correct directory, we can actually just run this curl command. And what this is going to do is it's going to send a test post request right to our server, to our start bot endpoint. We're sending some headers specifying that we're going to be sending some JSON data, marking that by -d with empty brackets. So to verify that our server is running correctly and we can hit this endpoint, when we run this request, we see the exact data that we put in the dictionary, which is that JSON response bot starting. So cool. We see that we have successfully set up the start bot endpoint to be able to send post requests. Let's begin implementing our call logic. Okay, so when our start bot endpoint gets the call, it needs to do its real job, which is talk to the Daily API and create a room and 2 tokens. All right, so first we're going to initialize a max session time variable, and it's going to be 5 times 60 or 300 seconds. Our audio call is going to be 5 minutes max. Next, after we initialize app, we're going to add 2 crucial pieces of middleware, and it's going to be these 2 pieces right here. Now, this exception handler is a safety net, so if anything crashes, it will catch the error and send a clean JSON response instead of hanging. And then this add middleware method is crucial. So our frontend is going to be running in a different port than our server, and the browser for security will block this unless our server says it's okay. The middleware tells our server to allow requests from the browser. Okay, so now for the main event. So we can just delete our placeholder start bot and replace it with the real one. Now head over to my GitHub repository, which I linked in the description. So click on this backend folder and then just go to the bot runner.py file and let's scroll down. We can just copy this whole start bot function as I have it in my code. And I'm going to paste in my start bot function and I'll just walk you guys exactly through how it works. So this function's main job is to send this post request, but in essence it's doing 3 separate tasks. So first we're declaring our headers for our API call. We are authenticating to the Daily API by passing it our API key and then letting it know we are passing some JSON data. And then it sets up our asynchronous client and it calls a post request to the rooms URL, passing in the headers and empty data. So what this does is it's creating a room. So then we have our response in this variable and we extract our room data, URL, and the name like so. Then we make an expiration timestamp for the room, basically saying whatever time it is now, add our max session time to that time. So if we make the room at about 5:30 plus our 5 minutes of max session time, our room will expire at 5:35. Then we make another post request to the tokens URL, which is the main Daily API URL /meeting tokens. We send it our headers and basic JSON data saying this is the room that we want to get the token for. This is our expiration timestamp and we are the owner. And then once you finally have that token in token response, we're going to extract the actual token and set that into bot token. And this is the token we're going to give to our agent to be able to join the room. Then if we scroll down for our last post request, we are doing the same thing here, sending a post request to the meeting tokens URL with the room name. However, for is owner, we're going to set that equal to false because we're giving ownership responsibility to the agent. Then we actually extract this token from this user token response variable and set that into this user token variable. So now we have bot token and user token. Okay, so our server has actually created the meeting now with all these post requests, but down here is where we actually employ the bot to join the room. This is like the magic step. So subprocess.popen opens a new background process. We use sys.executable to find our current Python interpreter, which is UV, and passes the room URL and bot token it needs to be able to join the room. So this is basically telling our computer to here's the directory that our bot.py file is in. Using this interpreter, run this file with these 2 arguments. And it does that in the subprocess.popen command where it passes in the command in the working directory that our file is in. Okay, our boss server is fully functional, but we have to run it and then open an index.html file separately. Let's combine them so our boss server also hosts our web page. So let's go up to where we initialize the cores middleware right here. And just below it, let's add the code to serve our front end folder. like so. So what this does right here is it tells our browser that our backend directory is just the directory of the file that we are in. So that's this bot.runner.py file. And then it makes a new frontend directory in our project root if it doesn't already exist. And then what this mount line does is any files in that frontend directory, it'll attach to this static URL. So if we had a file in this frontend directory called image.png, to see it in the browser, we will go to our localhost /static/image.png. Okay, so now let's replace our simple hello world app.get with the real one that serves our index.html file. And we can do that just like this. Frontend directory for this index.html file, which we have not yet made, but we will right now. And it opens this file and it codes it in a language that the browser can understand and returns the HTML response. Finally, let's update our if name is equal to main block to be more professional. So delete that uvicorn.run line and grab this from the bottom of my bot.runner.py file in GitHub and paste it in. Now, what this is doing is it uses argument parse to let us pass in the host, our port, and allow us to set this reload flag, which means anytime we make a change and save this file, the server will be updated in real time. Then we use the parse arguments method. So it has our host port and reload flag in this config variable. And then we find the project root. We say look for the backend directory in the bot runner file for the app component. We set the host port and reload flag and run the server. And to make this a little bit more neat, we can just make a backend folder to put our bot.py and bot.runner.py. We can just do that like so, backend, and we can drag these two files into that folder. Just like that. Next, what we're going to do is create a frontend subdirectory. So in our root folder, we'll create a folder called frontend. And then inside of that folder, I'll create a file called index.html. All right, so let's start editing this index.html file. And to do that, we're going to start with something called HTML boilerplate. And to get that, it's really simple. Just type an exclamation mark and then press enter. And then usually if you press tab, it'll bring up these 11 lines of code, which just defines our document, the language, and gives us a title and some body information. And I went ahead and updated the title to say something more relevant to what we were building. So AI wholesaling assistant. We have the header that says get your cash offer and then some text below it that just says click the button below to speak with our home specialist. Next, let's add our two buttons. So the start button, which is visible, and the join button, which we'll hide for now. We'll also add a divider to show status messages. So right here where I put this text, you can just paste in something like this. So line by line, we have this button that says talk to specialist now. We gave it an ID so our code can find it. And then an on-click attribute means that when we click this button, we're going to execute this start session method, which we'll define above in a little bit. But also, like I said, we have a second button here, which is join call now. Now this will show after we click the start button method. But for now, we are hiding it, setting its display equal to none. Now for the magic. So when we click our start session button, we want to be able to talk to our server and have it do all the work for us with the daily API. So we're going to initialize this start session method right at the top here. We're going to initialize a script like so. And in this script variable, we're going to define our start session function. So what this is going to do is it separates the start button and join button, allows for a loading state, and then calls our boss server by sending a post request to our start bot URL. Now we are storing the response of this post request in this res variable, which is going to have our room URL and our user token. So we're going to parse the response in JSON and store it into this data variable, and then switch to the join button and set the link to this button to the room URL, meaning when we click the join button, it will redirect us to the new URL of our daily room. And then for a message under that, we're going to say success, your private room is ready, and set the display for the start button to none to hide the original start button. And then we also have this block to handle any errors if we can't make the room cannot connect to the daily API. So at this point, we should have a fully functional app, and we could demo it right now. So to recap, when we go to our browser now, we should see a header and some text as well as a button. And when we click that button, it should be talking to our server successfully, create us a daily room, and show us a button leading to that daily room. So let's run this file. It's the same command as before, but now that we have this bot runner file in our backend directory, we're going to run uv-run backend / bot-runner.py. And I would press enter. And we can check out our app in this link. So it's important to note our server is running on 8000, but our front end is in 7860. Awesome. So now we see in our front end, we have get your cash offer. Click the button below to speak with our home specialist and talk to specialist now. So we can just pull up the console logs to see what's happening in real time. So I'm going to click on talk to specialist now. And in our network, it looks like successfully called the start bot endpoint, meaning our room is ready. So I'm going to click on join call now. And it brings us to this interface to join our call. So really quickly, I'm going to join and test if we can speak with our agent. So I'm going to click join.
How can I help you today?
Hey, yeah, how are you? What's your name?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. I don't have a personal name, but you can just call me assistant or give me a nickname if you'd like. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Can you just tell me a fun fact about San Francisco?
I'm glad to hear you're doing well. Here's a fun fact about San Francisco. The famous cable cars are the only moving national historic landmark in the United States.
All right, so it looks like we can speak to our agent and is joining our room. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the call. We see this nice saying you left the call. Have a nice day. And looks like everything went as expected, except for we got this small error in our log saying our on-participant left handler takes 2 positional arguments, but 3 were given. And that's because I forgot to actually add the reason. So let's just go up here to this parentheses and add reason like so. And next time we shouldn't be getting this error. But anyways, we saw that our agent joined the room and we successfully called the API and we're redirected through our button. So we basically have a working app now. Now we just need to polish it and make it look a little bit nicer, as well as adding an AI avatar. Okay, so we have our functional app, but it's pretty ugly. And I've prepared the final HTML and CSS for our We Buy Houses landing page. The start session function is exactly the same as the one we just tested, but the rest is just better styling. So I'm not going to code all that HTML and CSS by hand. I'm just going to paste it in. You can grab this full file from the GitHub repo I linked in the description, which is the final index.html file. And let's head back to the code and paste this in. So we can just paste in this whole file. Now it's going to look much better. Let's just save this and rerun our server. So I'm going to use the command that we've been running as well as a reload flag. Now let's go check it out in our browser. And as you can see, it looks much nicer. You can easily just prompt cursor and get a much nicer looking front end. But let's go back to the code because the last thing we need to do is implement our AI avatar. Okay, so we're going to be making most of these changes in our bot.py file. And we need to install the dependencies for Simly. So we can do that by writing uv add and then in quotation marks, Pipecat-AI with Simly in brackets like so. And just press enter. And that should install the dependencies for us. Let's check our TLML file and we see Simly right here at the end. The first thing we need to do is add the Simly import, and we can do that right below where we import all the other Pipecat plugins like so, importing the Simly video service. And the next thing we need to do is actually initialize the Simly component of our pipeline. So we have different parts of the pipeline like text-to-speech, the LLM, messages, and context. So right under the LLM, we need to initialize an instance of that Simly video service that we imported. And we're going to do that just like this, passing the API key and the specific face ID you want from Simly. So let's retrieve those right now from simly.com. So head over to simly.com and click on create avatar and then sign in. So you can use one of these avatars that they already have in the your avatars page, or if you want, like what I did for this avatar is I went to create avatar and you can click on create from preset and then click on any one of these face IDs and you'll be able to make your avatar. But anyways, once you do that, go back to your avatar and you want to copy your face ID. So let's head back to our code and pull up the .env file. And what you're going to write is simly_face_ID and then paste in the face ID that you just copied. Now we also need our simly_API_key, and that's easy to retrieve. Let's go back to simly.com. So on the left-hand side, let's click on API keys, and then I'm going to copy this and head back to our code and paste that in. Now we have our face ID and API key, which correctly is referenced in our bot.py file where we initialize the Simly object. The next thing we have to do is just make sure that we include it in the pipeline right after text-to-speech. So what we're going to do is just write in Simly AI like that. And the one step I skipped over was you have to add these to your daily transport parameters. So make sure your audio out enabled is set to true because before we had that set to false. And then you want these remaining 4, video out is enabled, video out is live, and then just 2 lines for the height and width settings. All right, so now we have done everything we needed to initialize our Simly instance. We have added our Simly import, we edited our daily parameters in our transport, and then initialized the connection to the Simly API and the Simly AI object and added it to the pipeline. So when we pull our voice agent up, our Simly avatar should show up. Now there's one more feature I want to add, and that's the ability to have our agent send emails when we disconnect from the call. We're going to make this function automatically trigger when a participant leaves. And make sure to add these imports at the top before we do anything for our email functions so we can access the email server in an asynchronous OpenAI object. So for this feature, we need 2 functions, and we're going to go right before we initialize our runner and paste in our write email function and our send email function. So really quickly going through these, after our conversation is done, it is going to be stored in this transcript variable. Then we're going to be using OpenAI asynchronously by defining this client instance. We then actually call the OpenAI LLM by using this create method, defining what model we want. And then we have to pass it 2 things, a system message and a user message. A system message tells it how to act. So we're saying you are writing an email to Jimmy, the specialist, about a new lead from a phone conversation. And just some different specifics like write to Jimmy, summarizing the lead details, include different details. And then we have a user message, which actually gives our LLM the transcript so it can see the exact conversation. Then we're going to have our response stored in this response variable. And the way you access it is exactly like this. And that's what we are returning. And we're going to be calling this function using the send email function. So here we're just using basic SMTP emailing. It's just a simple way to send emails from our code. And this is how we format it. We're going to define all these things in our env file. We are including the from email, who we want to send the email to, the subject, and the actual body, which our LLM is going to create. Then we're going to connect to the server and send the email with the send mail method. Now we need to include a few things in our .env file. So the user, which is the account that we're going to be sending this email from, the app password so you can authenticate to your email, the host, which is a pretty common number I'll give to you guys, and the port and the actual email that we're going to be sending to. So in my .env file, what I'm going to paste is going to look something like this. So I'm going to be sending from this email. This is my app password that I'm going to use. The SMTP is Gmail's basic SMTP protocol. And then I have the port and the email that I'm going to be sending to. And to retrieve your Gmail app password, go to your Google account and to the security tab tab, make sure two-step authentication is on, and you should see an option to create and copy a 16-letter app password. Lastly, we need to edit our onParticipant left handler. So if we scroll up a bit before we initialize these functions, we actually need to call these two functions, one to actually write the email and then one to send the email. So we're going to do that like so. And what's important to note is that we're using two thread here. So what's happening is we're calling the write email from transcription function. So what that does is we'll call the asynchronous OpenAI client and we'll store that in email body. And then we're actually using a separate thread because sending email is a blocking task, which means our program could be hanging or frozen if we were to just call this like we do above right here. So we're sending this to a separate thread saying, hey, on a separate thread, call this function so that it doesn't block our main program. All right, so now we're going to do our final test on our app. We have everything set up, like the avatar, the email integration, and the front end. And the last thing you'd want to do is just change the system instructions. So I made it something simple saying you are a conversational assistant for our company. Your goal is to gather initial information from a potential seller and book an appointment. And then I just gave it basic steps to follow. This probably isn't the best way to do this. You'd likely want to use a service like Pipecat flows, but for the sake of simplicity in this example, I just did it in one big prompt saying start by greeting them and then ask for their name. And then I just gave it a few consecutive questions specific to qualifying a lead in real estate. And then one last line to try and book the appointment. But those are the system instructions that I'm using for my agent. And one thing I recommend adding, which helps a little bit when the agent is being sent to our room, is this. Sometimes Simly takes a little bit longer to be ready. So here we can just add a check, which is a simple while loop to see if Simly is ready before we actually start the conversation. And now we are all done and ready to test our final product. So once we go to our front end, it should create that new daily room, and our AI agent, which now has an AI avatar attached to it, should be joining us. Feel free to play around with the different settings and components of the pipeline. For instance, I just changed the text-to-speech to 11 Labs to a voice that I thought a little bit more fit. But both Cartesia and 11 Labs have plenty of great options. So anyways, let's run this file, running the same command that we've always ran, which is going to be uv run in this bot runner.py file. So I'm going to click enter and let's head over to the front end. Now I'm going to click talk to specialist now. It looks like our room has been created and I'm going to join the call. And we are redirected to our daily room and I'm going to click join.
Oh, I'm Alex. Thanks for calling. Are you looking to sell a property today?
Yes, I am.
Great. Can I get your name, please? And what's the address of the property you're looking to sell?
Yeah, my name is Jim and the address of my property is 112 Flower Lane.
Thanks, Jim. Now, could you tell me about the property's condition? Does it need any repairs?
Yeah, it needs some window repairs upstairs and some of the floors need to be fixed.
Got it. Thanks for sharing that. What's prompting you to sell your property?
I'm just trying to get out of the area and move somewhere east.
That makes sense. How quickly are you looking to sell?
I want to get rid of it within the next 3 weeks.
Sounds good. Do you have a price in mind for the property?
Yeah, I don't want to go anywhere lower than around 200,000.
Great. Thanks for that information, Jim. This sounds like a property we can help with. The next step is a 10-minute call with our specialist, Jimmy. Are you free tomorrow morning or afternoon?
We could do it tomorrow morning around 10 a.m.
Perfect. I'll schedule your call with Jimmy for tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. You're all set, Jim. If you have any questions before then, feel free to reach out. Have a great day.
All right, so let's leave this call. And as you guys can see, we successfully received the email with all the relevant information, such as the name, condition, asking price, for example, neatly summarized by our AI agent. So that is it. We have confirmed that our project is working. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to drop a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.